They say your life flashes before your eyes right before you die. But for me, it was the face of my mother smiling at a birthday party I wasn't invited to, in the very house I paid for, wearing a dress I bought her last Christmas. That image was the last thing I saw before the windshield shattered. I had just finished a brutal 16-hour hospital shift. I'm a trauma nurse, ironic, right? I'd been on my feet since dawn, stitching strangers back together, calming panicked families, and keeping people alive when their bodies wanted to quit. But through it all, I'd kept going because it was my parents' anniversary. I'd ordered them a new mahogany dining set as a surprise, something elegant for the home they lived in, my home, the one I worked night shifts to pay for. I remember gripping the steering wheel, humming along to a song on the radio, thinking about how happy they'd be. I was tired, sure, but not enough to fall asleep at the wheel. I never saw the truck. Just a blaring horn, headlights far too close, and then blackness. When I opened my eyes, I didn't know where I was. There was a tube in my throat, my body hooked up to machines that beeped like distant thunder. My chest burned, my legs wouldn't move, everything felt wrong. A nurse leaned over me. You're in the ICU. You've been unconscious for 2 days. You're safe now. I couldn't speak, but I blinked hard, panicked. My parents, had they been told? She hesitated. We contacted the emergency numbers you listed. Your mother and father, they haven't come. At first, I thought she was mistaken. Maybe she meant they hadn't made it yet. Maybe traffic. Maybe they were confused or overwhelmed. Maybe anything but what I knew deep down was the truth. They weren't coming. When the tube came out and I could finally speak, I called them myself. My hand trembled as I held the hospital phone. My mother answered after several rings, her voice bright with laughter. Music played in the background. Hello? Mom, I croaked, my throat still raw. It's me. I was in a car accident. I'm in the ICU. There was a pause. Then she sighed. Oh, you're okay now, right? We've got some guests over. Can I call you back? Click. That was it. No questions. No panic. No which hospital are you in. Just inconvenience, as if my near-death experience had ruined her dinner party. I lay there, the phone still in my hand, the dial tone humming like a funeral dirge in my ear. A nurse walked in and gently took it from me. And that's when the silence hit, not just in the room but in my heart. For 3 days I stared at the ceiling, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and the soft shuffle of nurses who showed more care than the people who raised me. The doctors told me I had 4 broken ribs, a concussion, and internal bleeding that nearly took my life. But the worst damage wasn't physical. It was the shattering of an illusion I had clung to for years. You see, I wasn't one of those people who had a bad childhood. At least, not in the traditional sense. My parents weren't cruel. They were just absent, emotionally detached. I always thought if I worked hard enough, provided enough, they'd change, that they'd finally look at me and see something worth loving. So I became their everything: bank, chauffeur, therapist, emergency contact, and ATM. I paid their debts, bought them a car, kept the lights on in the house they gifted me after signing it under my name because their credit was shot. I missed birthdays and vacations to cover the mortgage. And every time they said, "You're such a good son," I took it like crumbs from a feast I was starving for. Now I knew the truth. I was never their son. I was their safety net, their financial plan, their emotional servant. On the 4th day, a nurse brought in my phone. I scrolled through social media because I'm human, and pain makes you crave connection, even in its cruelest form. That's when I saw it. Photos of my parents, dressed in designer clothes, standing next to the new dining set I'd just ordered. Captioned, "Anniversary dinner at our beautiful home. So blessed." Over 30 likes. Comments from friends calling them relationship goals. And there, right in the corner of one photo, my unopened hospital mail lying on the kitchen counter. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mouth dry, my pulse racing. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how normal it all looked. Like I didn't exist. And in that moment, something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. They had made a choice. And now? So would I. I would finish recovering. I would walk again. I would rebuild my strength, not just in body but in spirit. And when I got home, they wouldn't find the same son they left in that ambulance. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but one thing was certain: they had abandoned me in a hospital bed. Now I was going to show them what it felt like to lose the one person they thought would never walk away. The day I was discharged from the ICU, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, because I had cried enough. I left that hospital in a wheelchair, ribs still bruised, back aching, and a small overnight bag on my lap that the nurse helped me pack. I had come in on a stretcher. I left without a soul waiting for me. No balloons, no parents, no ride. I booked myself a cab with the hospital Wi-Fi and gave the driver the address of the home I bought, the one my name was on, the one where my parents were probably still laughing over leftovers from their anniversary party. The ride was quiet. I stared out the window, watching the world rush by in silence. Something in me had changed. The part of me that made excuses for them had gone dark. And as we pulled into the driveway, the sight of balloons still tied to the gate, glitter scattered on the walkway, and champagne bottles piled in the recycling bin hit me like a second crash. My key still worked. I opened the door slowly, expecting something, anything but not what I saw. My mom was in a silk robe, lounging on the couch with her feet up, scrolling through her tablet. My dad was shirtless in the kitchen, cooking steaks. Jazz music played low on the speakers. When they saw me, they didn't scream or run to hug me. My mother looked up, blinked twice, and said, "You're back already?" Already, as if I'd returned from a vacation, not a near-death experience. "How are you feeling?" My dad asked, barely meeting my eyes. I stared at them, then at the house, the new chandelier, the fresh orchids on the table, the leather chairs, all paid for with my card, all upgraded while I was fighting for my life. That was the moment it fully clicked. They didn't miss me. They missed the convenience of me. I wasn't their son. I was their income stream, their human credit line, and the worst part? I had built this illusion myself. I had always believed love came with sacrifice, that if I gave enough, they'd give it back, but they didn't want me. They wanted what I could offer. I had paid the gas bills when my dad's job went under. I'd covered the mortgage when the bank came calling. I skipped grad school so they wouldn't lose the house. I worked holidays, birthdays, double shifts. I never once asked them to give me anything. And now, sitting in my own living room, in a house I could barely afford to keep up with, I felt like a stranger intruding on their luxury. My mother pointed to a glass on the table. "There's soup if you're hungry." I looked at it, cold, uncovered, forgotten, just like me. That night, I stayed in the guest room, the one with the broken lock and peeling paint, the room they use for storage. I lay there in silence, the throb of my injuries sinking with the hollow throb in my chest. I thought about all the moments I'd brushed off, the missed calls, the way they'd never said, "Thank you," the vacations they took without inviting me but used my Amex for. I remembered one winter night when the heating broke, and I drove 3 hours to fix it myself because they said the repairman was too expensive. I remembered the day I got promoted and they didn't even ask how work was going. I remembered the birthdays they forgot but the gifts they demanded. All of it added up now like puzzle pieces I'd been forcing into the wrong frame. At some point, I had become their parent, their provider, their silent servant, and in return, all I ever got was the illusion of being needed. I didn't sleep. That night, I couldn't. My body was too sore, but my mind was worse. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, wondering how I had let it go this far. Then, just after a.m., I picked up my phone and started searching. Lawyer, deed transfer, financial fraud. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: justice, closure, a way out. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't love. This was exploitation dressed in family photos, and I wasn't going to let it go on, not anymore. The next morning, I made breakfast for myself and sat outside on the porch. My parents didn't join me. They never did. They were too busy living their version of comfort, completely unaware that the foundation it was built on had just cracked. I looked at the horizon, at the sun rising slowly over the rooftops, and made a decision not out of anger, but out of clarity. I was going to stop being their wallet. I was going to stop bleeding just so they could live in comfort. I would heal, rebuild, and when the time was right, I'd show them who I really was, not the obedient son, not the provider, but the man they never truly saw coming. Recovery wasn't just painful, it was lonely, humiliating, and revealing in the ugliest ways. I had to relearn how to walk, step by fragile step, with my spine stiff and every breath reminding me I wasn't invincible anymore. The nurses were kind, the physiotherapist relentless, and the hospital social worker gently curious, always asking if someone was coming to see me. I kept telling them my parents were just busy, that they'd visit once things calmed down, but week after week passed and no one came. Not a single call, not a single message. I lay there watching the sun move across the ceiling each day, trying to ignore the fact that I was more of a burden than a son. Every day I got stronger physically, but colder inside. My pain became fuel. My silence became strategy. I stopped asking why and started planning how. By the end of 6 weeks, I was walking on my own. Limping, yes, but upright, stable, and focused. The hospital staff congratulated me. I didn't smile. I was already thinking about what came next. When I finally got home, dragging my small duffel behind me, the door creaked open like the beginning of a horror film. The air smelled like perfume and expensive candles. The living room was spotless. There were champagne bottles in the trash, gift bags in the corner, and a pile of takeout receipts on the counter. I hobbled down the hallway to my bedroom and stopped cold. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. My bed was gone. In its place, racks of clothes, shelves of handbags, a full-length mirror with LED lights, and a vanity table covered in makeup. My mother's. Laughter echoed from the upstairs bathroom. I stood there, holding the doorframe, realizing they had not just erased me from their routines, they'd erased my presence completely. I turned around and found my father in the living room, lounging, with a glass of wine, his phone in one hand. He looked up, startled for half a second, then gave a lazy grin. "Thank God you're okay," he said, not moving an inch. I stared at him. No hug, no questions, no guilt. It was like I'd returned from a weekend trip, not a near-death experience. My mother walked in a moment later, in a silk robe, hair wrapped in a towel. "We weren't expecting you until next week," she said. "You should have called." I didn't respond. I just went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at the rows of sparkling wine, imported cheese, and boxes of chocolate-covered strawberries, no fruit, no eggs, no medicine, not even milk. I sat at the dining table, my dining table, the one I paid for, and quietly watched them live their lives. That night, I slept on the old recliner in the study. No one offered me the couch. No one asked how I felt. I didn't ask either. Because now I was focused, cold, calculated. I started making calls, first to my lawyer, then to the bank, then to the title company. I pulled up every statement from the last 6 months, every purchase, every transaction. I printed them out, highlighted them, and created a folder titled Evidence. I filed paperwork to reverse the deed since the house was in my name. I requested new cards, closed their access, froze every joint account, and alerted the utility companies that no one but me was authorized to make decisions. I planted cameras, small ones, in the living room, kitchen, and hallway, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted proof. I wanted them to show the world who they really were. For weeks, I lived like a ghost in the house I owned. They barely noticed. They laughed, hosted friends, spent, ordered food, took photos. Every night I sat in the shadows of the study, scrolling through footage, adding screenshots to the growing folder of neglect and exploitation. I watched them mock me, once my mother imitating my slow walk, giggling like a teenager. My father clapped, said, "He's so dramatic, isn't he?" I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt pity. They had no idea I was gathering the one thing they never expected: power. Quiet, controlled, and legal. My therapist, yes, I'd gotten one, said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the best form of healing isn't reconciliation. It's reclamation, and that's exactly what I was doing, reclaiming my space, my dignity, my story. One cold morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, shirtless, tracing the scar along my ribs. My body was weaker than before, but I had never felt stronger. I was no longer waiting for love from people who only knew how to take. I was building my exit, and this time I wouldn't say goodbye. It started with the Wi-Fi. One quiet morning, just before sunrise, I shut it off from the back end, changed the router password, reset the provider login, and watched from the shadows as my mother stomped through the hallway in her robe, phone in hand, swearing that the internet must be down again. Next came the cleaners, well, the absence of them. I'd canceled their services the night before, after watching weeks of security footage where my parents gossiped about me while sipping cocktails and using my health as a punchline. Then I shut off their access to the grocery delivery apps, paused every subscription, and removed their emails from every account they didn't even know I had set up for them. I moved back into my room, the room they had turned into a dressing area, and reclaimed it piece by piece. I took down the vanity, dragged out the clothing racks, and reinstalled the bed frame from storage. The door stayed locked. I didn't speak to them. I didn't eat with them. I became a ghost in the house I owned, watching the unraveling unfold. By the third day, the fridge was nearly empty. My father banged on my door first. "Hey, the utilities are acting weird. What's going on?" I didn't answer. I just turned the page of the book I was reading. Later, my mother came. Her knock was lighter, almost polite. "Sweetheart, can we talk?" Again, silence. What were they expecting? Gratitude? A hug for pretending I didn't exist while they drank champagne in my absence. This wasn't revenge, it was clarity, expressed in the only language they ever taught me: disconnection. That night, I sat in the living room for the first time in weeks, eating quietly while they hovered, unsure of what to say. I let them feel it, the unease, the tension, the role reversal. My mother finally spoke. "Is this about what happened in the hospital?" I looked up slowly. "You mean when I almost died and you didn't show up?" She blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness of my tone. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. But my voice sliced through the air like a verdict. "We thought you were fine," my father said defensively. "You texted that you were okay." I pulled a folder from beside me. Thick, labeled, detailed. Inside, bank statements, itemized spending, screenshots of social media posts, and most damning of all, video stills from my surveillance cameras showing them laughing about my limp. Using my accident as a dinner party anecdote, I stood up and handed it to them. "This is your notice," I said. You have 30 days. They stared at it, confused. Notice for what? My mother asked, her voice shaking. I met her eyes without blinking. Eviction. Silence fell over the room like a guillotine. My father laughed, nervous, awkward. You're joking. You wouldn't do that to your own parents. I didn't flinch. Watch me. The next day, my lawyer showed up, formal, calm, unapologetic. He handed them the legal documents confirming that not only had I frozen their access to shared finances, but I had also begun proceedings to take full control of the property ownership. Utilities, everything, their names were removed, their access revoked, their leverage gone. My father paced. My mother cried. I stood by the window, sipping coffee, letting their panic fill the air the way mine once did when I was alone in that ICU, praying for a call that never came. I didn't shout. I didn't explain. I let the silence do what years of words never could. They begged, swore they'd change. My mother even dropped to her knees at one point, sobbing that family should forgive, but I remembered her voice. When I called from the hospital, how she said, "Can this wait?" I remembered every lonely breakfast, every ignored message, every holiday they spent without me while spending my money. This wasn't a punishment. It was an ending. I gave them 30 days, not out of kindness, but legality. They spent the next few weeks scrambling, trying to figure out where they'd go, who they could call, what they could sell. I watched it all quietly, still helping myself heal in the background. Physical therapy, therapy, reading, rebuilding. The day they moved out, my mother hugged me with stiff arms and whispered, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. My silence had become my shield. My father didn't even look back. He just carried a final suitcase down the steps and slammed the car door shut. When they were gone, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. It was quiet now, peaceful, still mine. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was free. For the first time, I could hear my own breath, my own thoughts, my own truth. They had left me in the ICU and lived like royalty in the home I built. And now, they finally knew this house wasn't theirs, and I wasn't theirs either, not anymore. They moved out on a Thursday. The sky was gray, and the silence they left behind was heavier than I expected, but not in a sad way. It was quiet, yes, but it was mine. I watched through the living room window as the last of their boxes were shoved into a borrowed car. No hugs, no tears. Just a slammed door and a cloud of dust trailing down the road as they disappeared into a life they never thought they'd have to build for themselves. For a moment I stood at the door, half expecting someone to say, "You did the right thing." But no one came, and maybe that was the point. The right thing didn't always come with applause. Sometimes it came with stillness, with space, with breath. I walked back into the house and took it in like it was the first time. The carpet had indentations where their furniture used to sit. The smell of cheap cologne still lingered in the hallway. But for once, the air didn't feel suffocating. I opened every window, let light in, let the wind carry out the years of guilt, obligation, and silence that had clung to the walls like mildew. I didn't cry, not even a little, because grief wasn't what I felt, it was rebirth. I reclaimed every inch of that house, not by painting the walls or throwing away their leftover things, but by filling it with my own life again. I invited over the people who visited me in the hospital, real friends, the kind who brought soup and sat beside me when I couldn't sit up straight. We shared meals in the kitchen they used to control. We laughed on the couch where they once rolled their eyes at me. I turned the guest room into a recording studio, something I'd dreamed of for years but never dared to start because "that's not stable" was always my parents' argument. Stability was a leash they wrapped around my neck. Now I was running free. I went back to school to part-time nursing courses, just to sharpen my skills. I didn't tell anyone at first. I just wanted something for me, something that wasn't about proving I was worthy of love. Something that didn't end with them clapping from the sidelines and taking credit. My days became quiet, structured, peaceful, and slowly the scars, both physical and emotional, began to fade. One day, about 2 months after they left, I got a letter. A real one, in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting made my stomach drop. It was from my dad. I opened it slowly, my hands steady but my heart racing. The letter was short. Just a few lines. He wrote, "We didn't raise a good son. You raised yourself, and we were too blind to see it. We thought we were using what you offered freely, but the truth is, you were drowning, and we didn't even look down. I don't expect forgiveness, just wanted you to know we know now." I sat with that letter for a while, just staring at it. I didn't cry. I didn't write back. I didn't need to, because this wasn't about revenge. It never was. This was about choosing myself for the first time in my life, about realizing that love without respect is manipulation. That family without care is just a contract written in guilt, and I wasn't signing it anymore. I framed the letter, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. I survived. I rebuilt. I chose to walk away from people I once believed I couldn't. live without. And I didn't just live. I thrived. The house felt warmer with every passing week. The studio began to bloom. I wrote songs, stories, memories into melodies. I found pieces of myself in the art I had buried for years. People started coming around not because they needed something but because they wanted to know me. And for the first time I let them in, not out of desperation, not to fill a void, but because I had space now. I had peace. I had me, sometimes. I think about my parents. I wonder if they ever look back and realize the cost of their comfort. But then I let that thought drift away, like a balloon in the sky, visible, but no longer reachable. My story didn't end in that hospital bed. It didn't end when I locked my bedroom door or when the lawyer handed them those papers. My story began the moment I chose to stop begging for love and started demanding respect. This chapter of my life isn't one of sadness. It's one of awakening, of power reclaimed, of silence transformed into strength. I didn't lose my family. I let go of people who never saw me as more than a utility. And in return, I found something greater: freedom, self-worth, and a future I'm finally proud of. I chose me this time, and I would choose me again.